Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. 1 week later, Larry Kudlow, CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the weekend. Much has happened in these last 7 days, Larry. When last we met, we were watching the early returns from the East Coast of the United States. I speak to an audience overseas to understand. We have 3 time zones. And as the election comes forth, there are closings of polls, and then we hear the exit polling in the East Coast, and then we roll across the country. But we were watching Florida. We were watching, certainly Florida profoundly. We were watching North Carolina, watching New Hampshire. We were not necessarily watching Pennsylvania when we spoke a week ago. And now, President-elect Donald Trump, a transition team led by Vice President-elect Mike Pence, and a library of changes coming if to follow the Trump campaign these last months. A very good evening to you, Larry. And what is the key moment that you've enjoyed these last days of watching the transition? Good evening to you, Larry.
Good evening, John. So, my key moment, you want to know the truth, the bottom of my heart truth,
okay,
is the Trump stock market rally. Look, on this show, we have talked for a year about Trump's pro-growth tax cuts,
right,
deregulation, health care reform, and all the rest of it.
And we always worried that it wasn't being said often enough on the campaign trail.
Yes, that's correct. And the stock market got into this terrible groove where it decided that Hillary was best for the country. And on Election Day, I wrote a piece before the polls closed. I said, if Trump wins, buy the Trump dip. And so we're sitting up on the set at CNBC, really shortly after I went off your show. We were on the thing for 8 hours, and about, 10:30, 11 o'clock, the market was down 800 points because it looked like Trump was going to win. And then as the evening wore on, suddenly the market was down 400, then 200. It opened the next day over 300 points. It was up 950-something points last week. And, John, it just does my heart good to figure out and see that even investors can come to their right mind. And the other side of this coin, bonds are selling off, prices are falling, and interest rates are rising. This is a good sign, not a bad sign.
It's a growth sign.
That's right. That is precisely right. And by the way, with rates rising from the market and the growth side, it gives the Fed some cover to start normalizing. Slowly, I hope. Right. They actually can do that now. The market has given them a signal, and I'm all for it. But I love the Trump rally, John. I mean, there are going to be corrections along the way. But right now, the market is hot. It's all about growth. It's all about Trump's tax cuts and business and deregulation. I just love it. I just got to tell you.
This is about prosperity. Larry Kudlow and his colleague Steve Moore have spoken prosperity for years, but especially since the debates beginning in 2015 when Donald J. Trump, now President-elect of the United States, pointed to Larry Kudlow as the author of a plan. We now understand that much of that plan is the Brady Bill in the House of Representatives. One of the advisors to the Trump campaign right now and the Trump transition joins us, our colleague Steve Moore of the Trump campaign. Steve was in a meeting today with the House of Representatives, the very important majority whip of the House of Representatives, Mr. Scalise. We have news from the House that Paul Ryan is unanimously the choice of the House of Representatives to continue as Speaker, and we can believe that Mr. Scalise will continue as whip. Steve, a very good evening to you. It's been a week since we spoke. I remember you going out the door of my studio, and I said, well, I'll see you either in the Executive Office building or back at the Heritage Foundation. I think the determination is that it's more Executive Office. You were in a meeting with the whips today. What is that, Steve, and what were you discussing about prosperity? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. And just to follow up something Larry Kudlow said about the stock market rally, when you ask about the favorite moment of the last week, Larry, it was for me when Paul Krugman, the left-wing economist from the New York Times, was asked the morning after the election, Larry, when would the market recover? And he said never. So the left had this thing all wrong. Look, I met with the House Republican whip office. Those are the 50 or so Republicans who are in charge of counting the votes and making sure that Paul Ryan has the votes he needs to pass legislation. And it was a good group of members who showed up. And my message to them was very simple, gentlemen. I said, look, it was working class America that won this election for Donald Trump and for the Republicans. These many of them union workers who've never voted Republican before in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Iowa. And I say you now have an incredible responsibility to stand up and deliver for these people. They have not felt this recovery. The recovery has not reached them. And, we need policies, whether it's tax policy or it's deregulation policy or it's energy policy that will bring jobs back to these areas and give these American people a pay raise. And I always go back to what Larry says, that if you cut the business taxes, the beneficiaries of a business tax cut are not necessarily the owners of the businesses, but the people who work for the businesses, the workers. That's the way you get a pay raise. Americans want a pay raise. John, they haven't had one in 15 years.
It's really key. Steve, did you get any sense from the floor whips what their priorities are going to be? What comes first, what comes second, what comes third?
Well, I did, and we talked mostly about the tax cut, Larry, and I laid out a plan. I don't know if this is what the Trump team will eventually do, but I said let's do the business tax cut, let's do the immediate expensing, and 15% for all the 26 million businesses in this country, and then let's have the repatriation to bring capital back to the United States at a 10% rate. And then I said, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Larry, I said let's use that 10%, let's use that $100 billion or so that we get from that money that comes back to the United States in tax revenues, and use that for the infrastructure program. And I believe, Larry, if we do that, we can get some of these Democrats in the Senate and the House to vote for a real jobs bill. We haven't had one of those for a long time, because that's what the voters said they want. They want jobs and they want raises.
Well, okay, the number may come to something like $3 trillion. I mean, I think in our plan and in the Brady plan,
yeah.
I think it's about a 10% repatriation toll.
That's money overseas, right, Larry? Because they're concerned about the burden of taxes and regulation in the U.S.
And they're double taxed. So it might even be 3 years, 10%, which would be even better. But I don't want to give it all to infrastructure, Steve. I want to give as much of that repatriation as I can in the form of tax cuts. Okay? I want it to cover as much as we can with expensing and the 15% corporate tax rate. And also, Steve, we got to cover the personal tax rates and the increase in the standard deduction, all that stuff. So let's spread the guilt around. I don't know what the right number is for infrastructure. Mr. Trump has said $1 trillion. That may or may not be the right number, but I understand your political point. I think it's a good point, but I don't want just repatriation for infrastructure. I want the repatriation to really help us pay for...
Larry, would the money help for that expensing part of your plan as well?
It could. It really could. I mean, look, what you're doing here is basically creating a whole new set, really a radical new set of business incentives for large and small companies.
To invest, yes.
To invest.
Yes.
And they can invest. I don't care how they invest. Share buybacks, that just means money goes to investors who could start up new companies. Dividends, that's fine. It means money goes to investors. They can do whatever they want with them. Wages, as Steve pointed out, benefits, as Steve pointed out, that's very important. But I just want to make sure there's enough money to cover the largest tax cut since Ronald Reagan, and if I'm not mistaken, Steve, it would probably be the largest business tax cut in American history. I just want to cover that.
Well, I'm with you 100% on that. The other thing that we talked about, which is obviously a huge high priority for Republicans, and obviously Donald Trump, I think it may have been the issue that brought him over the top, was rescinding Obamacare and replacing it with something that makes a lot more sense, that covers people at lower cost, that allows you to keep your doctor in your hospital, and that too will be a major priority. And the Republicans are very committed to that.
And deregulation, Steve. I know that isn't all the House, but it's going to take some time to unpack all the regulation of the Obama years. Do they have a priority for that?
Well, look, I believe that a lot of the deregulation that has to take place, not all of it, but the stuff right out of the gate, is to repeal the regulations that Obama put in place, and those can be done largely with executive orders. Let's not forget that Barack Obama in the last 4 years has passed almost no legislation through Congress, almost none. Everything he has done has been with the stroke of a pen at the Oval Office desk without legislation. That means that the new president can come in, Donald Trump, and repeal some of those. And one of the ones that I feel very strongly about, I've mentioned it before on your show, is this clean power plant bill, to put those coal miners back to business. I believe that Democrats lost this election because, in no small part, because of their environmental extremism that required blue-collar Americans around the country to pay the price for their environmental policies.
Steve, coming back to the healthcare, rescinding healthcare, Obamacare, what's the vision in the House? And especially, I'm interested in, if we rescind it and replace it, will that also include the myriad tax increases, which I think have done great damage to the economy in the last couple of years?
Those are gone. Those are gone. We're going to get rid of the let's see, there was the medical device tax. There was the surtax. Remember that, Larry? The investment surtax that raised the capital gains and dividend tax by about 4 percentage points.
And the cap gains tax. The cap gains tax.
And then there were taxes on our drug manufacturers and vaccine producers. I mean, I could never understand. If we want more medical devices, more innovation, why would we tax them?
And there's a payroll tax in there, too. There's a 0.9% increase in the payroll tax, 3.8% on the investment tax, and then, as you said, taxes on medical equipment and so forth. That stuff has done a lot more damage on top of the expiring Bush tax cuts than people realize.
It broke the morale of the country, Larry. That's what because it was endless, and with Mrs. Clinton in the office, it was going to get worse. Larry Kudlow, because we have a new day, and when we come back, we'll talk about timelines, the perspective of the Trump transition and the Trump administration for getting that tax cut into the American citizens' pockets. Larry Kudlow, CNBC, Steve Moore of the Trump campaign, Trump transition. I'm John Batchelor.